Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the MedTech Impact Podcast, where you get to hear from leaders and innovators who are shaping the future of medical technology. I'm Kyle Cruz.
And I'm Richard Meiklejohn.
And we're your hosts of the show.
Okay, Kyle, before we get started, I want to give a quick shout out for the Med Device Boston Conference happening on September 25th and September 26th at the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center. There really is a stacked lineup this time. We have startup pitches, we have startup panels, we have reverse pitches, we have lightning pitches. There is every pitch you could want. So if you haven't already, be sure to get your ticket by heading over to the registration page and be sure to use the code IMPACT in all caps to get your free expo pass and a 20% discount on your conference fee. We're excited for the event and we hope to see you there. So today on the MedTech Impact Podcast, we're delighted to be joined by Sanna Gaspard, CEO and founder of Rubitection. Sanna, welcome to the show.
Thank you both. Excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. You're a former M2D Impact company. You were a winner of Boston Scientific's Connected Patient Challenge, and you have had numerous other accolades, as well as recently launching, I should say, a crowdfunding campaign, which I'm sure we're going to talk about later on. But before we get into all the juicy parts, let's set the stage for the listeners, as we always like to do, and tell them what is that big problem that Rubitection is looking to solve.
The big problem we're looking to solve is the lack of early detection tools, as well as the unreliability of the early diagnostic test. So to give you a patient-centric example, there are several patients who may have surgery or an acute surgery. So let's say open heart surgery or brain surgery. They will survive the surgery, go into rehab or go into the healing process and develop a chronic wound like a bed sore that then actually leads to their passing. Because everyone's so concerned about their healing heart or their healing brain condition that they forget that this person needs to also be mobile. And by laying in bed for long periods, their skin starts to break down. And because you can't detect it early in a reliable way or intervene in a reliable way without assessing the skin reliably, these patients end up getting very severe wounds where their skin basically dies, their underlying tissue dies, the bone is exposed, and it can get infected and give them sepsis. So we're trying to solve that problem and bring awareness, develop a solution for that.
Wow, no small problem being addressed there. So what are some of the numbers you're seeing in these types of issues?
So in these types of issues, specifically looking at bed sores, because we can also treat diabetic foot ulcers, but looking at bed sores, it affects 2 million people every year. Of those 2 million, 60,000 of them will die each year needlessly. Again, because if you can detect it early, you can prevent it. With that high death rate and high impact rate, there's also a huge cost to the healthcare system. So each year, because wounds are some of the most expensive care you can have, because it can sometimes require either an amputation or a skin graft, which can cost up to $100K or more. These wounds each year cost the U.S. healthcare system $26 billion in direct treatment costs every year. So it's a really big problem, and that's not even including the cost of treating diabetic wounds. This is just pressure injury wounds. The cost of treating diabetic wounds is even higher, right? So we are really trying to target a pervasive and common problem that's affecting patients from home care, nursing homes, and hospitals.
So Kyle, I think we've got a pretty clear problem on a huge scale. I mean, I think about all the patients that go into hospital situations and, face these circumstances. It's, I think for their loved ones and for the patient themselves, it's quite scary, the prospect that this could be happening to them.
Yeah, Richard, I agree. And, Sanna, I'm interested. How do doctors or physicians today actually detect that skin breakdown? What's the way how do they do that today?
So that's a great question. So if you would think about it, like when you get a sunburn, what's the way that you can tell you have a sunburn?
Well, by looking at it and just feeling the burn,
Exactly. And that's exactly what doctors do as well, because that's where the technology is, and that's the standard of care. So the way they assess skin is by looking for that inflammation, which is skin redness, and then touching the skin to look for changes in its thickness or softness, and temperature. And that's the same thing that we do for sunburns is the exact same thing that clinicians do when you go in to evaluate, the presence of a developing wound or the early signs of inflammation that can lead to a wound. The problem with that is, on darker skin tones, you can't see it. Also, because it's used not just to assess if you have a sunburn, but to actually make a clinical diagnosis that would require a clinical treatment, it's so subjective that you can have two people do the same test and get two different answers, right? And so you don't know until the wound develops who was right, and that's just unacceptable at this point. There are some other technologies on the market that's coming out, but they are either really expensive, so aren't really difficult to use. So they haven't been widely adopted yet. So the standard of care is still just that visual inspection.
Okay. So it sounds like a real manual process today with a lot of room for error. So that would make a lot of sense as to the problems that you in the world is seeing in this area. Now, I guess let's talk about your solution. What's Rubitection doing? What does your technology look like, and how does it work?
So, when we learned about the problem, we were really inspired to come up with a low cost and easy to use solution. So understanding that clinicians were currently just doing a visual inspection to find that those areas of redness, we developed an optical device that you can place onto the skin that will take an objective measurement of that skin redness and early signs of inflammation and track those changes as the wound develops to allow early intervention. It will also enable you to take a picture of the area. So if you have a later stage wound, that you can capture those features so that everything becomes more digitized and than just a visual inspection of what's going on in the skin. This way, clinicians, and whether they're at home or in the hospital, will now have data analytics to develop care plans, to evaluate the effectiveness of care, and to help optimize workflows to make sure that the most at-risk patients are getting the care they need.
So will this be a device then that's primarily at first used in a hospital or doctor office setting?
Initially, we would like it to be used in a hospital, in outpatient setting. So you would go to the hospital, your nurse in the ICU might use it, and it might also go home with you when you get discharged. Let's say if you've had heart surgery or hip surgery. And the reason why that's important is because a lot of wounds sometimes happen at home. So to address that, we've kind of taken that into consideration with the design of our solution. So it's a small handheld device with optics at the end or lighting systems at the end that you just place onto the skin. You leave it on the skin for a few seconds, and we capture the data of what's going on with your skin. And then after that, with our customized care management app, you would get the results around the severity and care recommendations. And then also through the app, you can take an image, and we would then provide you with any features that were present around the wound. So it's really something that we thought about to keep it super simple and super easy. It's small, it's lightweight, it's portable. It can take it anywhere. Anyone can use it with minimal training so that it can go straight from a hospital to home care in the future.
Cool. So is that something that's part of that plan, which I'm sure we'll get into in just a little bit for the go-to-market strategy, but do you see this actually becoming maybe a consumer product later on down the road?
That is our vision for it, in fact. But before we get there, as you know, with the trends in healthcare right now, there's a big trend, and we don't know how, the longevity of this trend, but it's at its burgeoning point, is that healthcare at home is starting to become a cascading trend and people are trying to figure out how to make it into reality, how to meet patients where they need the care, which is in their home. So even if we were starting in the hospital, there's still an opportunity for us to get into the home and at the bedside, where patients would need the device most. So we're trying to leverage hospital partnerships to start in hospitals, but then use that to get into the home where either a nurse can use it or a patient can use it. So the short answer would be yes, but we're also leveraging current market healthcare trends of bringing care into the home.
Now, I have several more questions, and I don't want to hog up all the time, and I think we will get around to some of this, but the last one around your solution, what about AI and machine learning?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked because I forgot to mention that.
Yeah.
That's a great question. So Our solution does also incorporate image processing and AI. We use that to get additional features from the wound and the skin to provide that data to nurses and the physicians to have more reliable and objective assessment of features in the wound that can show you it's healing, or features that can show you it's getting worse, that oftentimes can be very difficult to identify visually. When you first see a wound, you have to have that specialized wound care training to identify the features and what's going on. And we really want to bring that, level of expertise down to everyone. Because, in the future, it's predicted there's going to be a huge staffing shortage within hospitals. And so you can't expect everyone's going to have that level of training. And so we're trying to make it accessible for the bedside nurse who's in her first year to the well-skilled nurse and wound care physician who's been there for 20 years.
Accessible and, of course, very easy to
Yeah.
use.
Amen.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah,
Well,
we
I
love
mean,
that word.
Yeah.
Accessible is the name of the game. I think we were talking about this before we came online. The problems with a lot of technologies not being accessible to the people who truly need them. And so it's so exciting to hear that that's a big part of your strategy. Before we get into a little bit of the go-to-market, I'd love to know, how did you focus or come to focus on this specific problem and this technology?
I've always been really excited about healthcare and medical devices or product development. So in undergrad, my major was biomedical engineering. At the time I was pre-med because I thought I was going to be a medical physician. And then I decided I didn't like the work environment. But then to compensate for that, I picked up an electrical engineering minor because I wanted to do devices, medical devices. I still wanted to work in healthcare in some way. So knowing that healthcare and medical devices was always my passion, I was always kind of like in that space. And I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So during my PhD, I was looking for a project in a huge healthcare problem that was largely overlooked, but it was very expensive and was a very common problem that I could use technology to help solve that problem. And I came across chronic wounds during my PhD as a potential topic where we could not just do research, but develop an actual solution that I could translate out of the university to start improving care. And so once I kind of did some of the initial preliminary research and saw, how common it was that it was affecting, it was a problem not just in hospitals, but in nursing homes and home care. It was a global healthcare problem. It's almost like a human health problem. Like, how people get the flu? As you get older, or if you get it, just even if you get into a car accident and end up in the hospital, you're suddenly at risk for developing these wounds. And without proper treatment, you can survive your primary injury, which might be a car accident or a heart attack, and then die from this. That people always in shock, like, oh my gosh, why didn't someone tell me? Why didn't I know? Why didn't someone do something? And so I realized, here's where we could really have a huge impact, and not just in the US, but around the world.
So extensive knowledge, but equally, I think it's matched by an extensive passion for solving this problem, which is obviously very exciting. And I think, again, you mentioned that word impact, which clearly is a word we love, being the MedTech Impact podcast. But also, I'd love to then know about a little bit of the workflow that you talked about. So how has it been for you in terms of building that go-to-market and really understanding the workflow? I'd love to know how you've been approaching that.
And so understanding the workflow is critical, because one of the major important factors about being accessible is also obviously price, but also being easy to use and being able to integrate into clinical workflow. So the way that I've approached that, one is in two ways. So because this was my PhD research, I was doing work already in nursing homes and got to see firsthand what the workflow was, and actually had firsthand experience assessing these wounds on my own for research, and kind of got a sense for how hard it was. Just the whole process around it is difficult. And then beyond that, we then targeted clinical wound care specialists in hospitals and nursing homes to walk us through what is their process for assessing a wound and managing it. What does that workflow looks like? Who's the first point of contact? Who does it get escalated to? And who's the final decision maker in that process? And how does the final decision maker influence everyone else before and moving forward? So once we understood that, we made that a critical part in terms of influencing how we design the use of the system and the data it provides and the workflow around the system. So that's actually a very critical component of it.
And in terms of where you are now, like what's that plan or strategy to get this into the hands of care professionals and obviously build up that data set?
So as you know, as medtech, that's a long path. But it can also be a straightforward path because we're a low risk FDA device as a class one. So our path is to partner with hospital systems for testing, obviously to raise money to do that. But we will first partner, get some initial data, and then from there move into the product development process where we will take what we've learned from the testing and the feedback from the physicians and use that to turn our current prototype into our first initial product that we can sell. At that point, we would want to continue then working with our clinical collaborators. Once we've finished the product development and gotten FDA approval, work with those clinical collaborators to be our initial beta testers with the system, right? And once we've gotten additional feedback from them and optimized the system to make sure that it really seamlessly fits into the workflow, we would then start working on corporate partnerships to launch the broader market. So our path to market is pretty clear and straightforward. It's just about having the access, funding, and resources to execute on it.
Kyle, there's that word access again. I think it's going to be an eternal word that keeps propping up when it comes to innovation and just taking these things to patients. It's, you know, something I'm sure we'll maybe talk about later on in terms of the challenges, but it's obviously nice to hear that there is a little regulatory pathway in terms of getting this to market.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking about the class one, Sanna, you know, and we were just curious, you know, when it's class one, what does that regulatory pathway look like?
So as a class one, I don't know how familiar you guys are with all the classes, but I'm assuming as a MedTech podcast, most people are probably familiar. But you know, class three is the most stringent pathway and it takes the longest time and the most amount of money. And class one is the lowest pathway, where you need to just show that it's safe and efficacious and that you can have high accuracy in achieving the intended use. So it's really about developing the product under FDA regulations or, you know, the ISO 1345, and having suppliers and manufacturers who meet those regulations. And then at that point, it's kind of our particular process would be 510K. So it's then also submitting safety data, patient efficacy data that shows it's safe and that it works to the FDA, and then we can launch the product. So it's pretty straightforward and low risk. And we already have a predicate device. So we know that this pathway is a successful pathway because our competitors have already done it as well.
Okay, interesting. So a 510K pathway, that is what is required.
Yeah, as a class one. So we'd be a class one 510K.
Okay. And where do you stand, I guess, currently with that 510K submission, and where does that stand in your timeline?
I would say we are at the beginning of that process or early on in that process. We've had an initial meeting with the FDA. We plan on submitting some additional pre-sub meetings with them, but we can't technically fully start the 510K process until we move into product development and doing everything under 1345 certifications. So that's going to require us to raise the money to do that because that's not a cheap process. You have to set up quality systems. We have to do broader patient testing. We have to set up the manufacturing and do the design freeze. So all of that, you know, as part of the FDA process. Everyone thinks that FDA is just, you know, a thing you submit, but it's actually a process. You have to, you know, when they're like, oh, well, how much does it take to get FDA approval? I'm like, well, the application's only like 3,000 or 4,000 if you're a small entity. But the process you have to follow in terms of product development, quality systems, 510K data, that takes money, right? And so, and that takes significant amount of money. And so, you know, that's where we are right now in that process, is trying to get the resources and funding that we need to kind of start all of that process.
Okay. So would you say that, are you in a position right now where you might have a prototype or a first generation product that is maybe being used in some sort of study today? And are you seeing any kind of, are you getting feedback from clinicians currently?
Yeah, so we have a functional prototype. We've already done some initial human testing with it and got some positive data that shows that we can measure that biomarker. So if you had a sunburn today, we could measure that and tell you had a sunburn, right? For example, like we can measure that skin inflammation. We also have some initial click-through prototypes of our care management system. So it's really now just trying to raised the money to take it to the next level, which is building out additional prototypes, building out a functional MVP of the software system, and getting more patient data behind it. That would then allow us to hit the next major milestone, which is launching into product development and initial product launch.
When you put your first prototype in your customers' hands for the first time and you saw them use it, what was that reaction like?
For me or for them?
For them. For you, I'm sure it was ecstatic, right? What an exciting
Yeah.
time, right? But what was it like for them where there might not be a simple and easy to use technology like yours today?
Yeah, normally they're usually pretty excited.
Yeah.
They're really excited, to the extent that I've had one nurse a few years ago who was kind of just like following me around to conferences and following our progress, being like, when can I get it? When is it going to be available to purchase? How much longer is this going to take? And I was like, tell the investors, they don't think this is a real problem. So usually most people are pretty excited about it because they are, as I said, it's really just a visual inspection. All of that care coordination is then dependent and reliant on that, and it can make things a little bit inefficient and confusing sometimes,
Mhm.
especially for people who are not actively trained in it. My favorite people to talk to are nurses and wound care specialists because they're always excited because they're like the frontline workers. And so they're the ones who are seeing it first, and they're just like, yeah, we need something. I would love this. So it's usually exciting for me, a little bit exciting for me and stressful, but super exciting for them. The benefit to hospitals and investors is that there's a lot of financial penalties that drive the need for technology and the purchase of our technology in the space. So, for example, facilities, because of these wounds, are liable for lawsuits, which on average are $250,000 per lawsuit, can go as high as 312 million was one particular payout. They are subject then to Medicare penalties that can be up to 3% of their annual Medicare payments and revenue. They are also forfeit Medicare reimbursement for the cost of care if they don't detect it on admission, and which means they have to pay that $10,000 potentially to $100,000 for a severe wound out of pocket. And that cost eventually trickles down to the patient. And so there's a huge ROI in terms of cost savings, potentially driving revenue through Medicare reimbursements for direct treatments by implementing technology for early detection, especially on admission, that they can have the data to show, no, this patient came in with this condition, so then they can request the payment from Medicare. So there's a huge upside for facilities that will drive the sales of this solution. But that initially is not going to be from Medicare reimbursement per se for the device, as it is tied to Medicare reimbursement for the treatment. And our solution can help drive early detection and that treatment.
Well, that's a pretty strong economic argument, which I think always this comes down to. And clearly, of course, then the added side to this, Kyle, is like the patient experience. You're going to be improving the standards or the outcomes for the patient, which again is obviously what we're all trying to achieve and support as an outcome. Sam, I wanted to ask if there was one major single problem, what would you say that is right now?
In reference to getting the product to market, or
Yeah, in reference to sort of moving forward to that next stage.
I personally feel the biggest problem, because it drives everything, is funding or funding and access. And access is just access to hospital systems who have a focus on innovation and improving quality care, for research collaboration, for user feedback. But I would say those would be the two. Access to capital to grow, because as you know, medtech is capital intensive, especially at the early stages when you are doing product development, and then access to clinical partners.
And Kyle, we normally always jump in with the milestones, but I know there's something short term which we should really touch on now, as I referenced at the beginning, in terms of how Sanna is looking to address that financial challenge.
That's right. Yes. Sana, what does that look like? I think you might have mentioned an initiative earlier on that I think the people and everyone listening in should be aware of. So what are you trying to do right now to raise that capital?
So to raise that capital, we're currently raising 1.6 million, and we are providing an opportunity for the broader community to be a part of our success through our Wefunder campaign. So we've already probably raised around half of that funding through established investors, but we wanted to also give an opportunity to the broader community to be a part of our success. Because oftentimes, when I go and give presentations at a conference or a pitch competition, there's always 2 or 3 people in the audience, or a little, up to 5 people who will come to me and say, my grandmother had this, my grandfather died of this, my mom just had hip surgery and she got one and we didn't know, or I have a child who's in a wheelchair and this is something we're so worried about. How can we support you? And oftentimes I didn't really have a good response because I was really focused on targeting hospital systems and targeting accredited investors and angel groups and VCs, that I would just say, thank you, thank you for sharing your story. If you know anyone else who can help, let me know. But, right now, we're just, heads down working. And so now we can finally say, yeah, you can help us and be a part of that journey if you want to invest and be a part of our success and be a part of actively changing healthcare. You can now, reserve the right to invest in Rubitection on Wefunder. And I'll provide that link for you guys that you can post with the podcast. But yeah, we're trying to get the word out and let people know now's the time, because as the company grows, we won't have the opportunity again to open it up to the broader community per se. So this is really the best time to get in.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I think at the end of the day, when you or a loved one is impacted by, a health condition, you're inspired to do everything you can to help make sure that other people don't have to go through, what they. So I think it's a brilliant approach there. So how long is the crowdfunding running for?
We're probably going to run it until early December. We've already got some investors who've reserved their investment. And so in the next couple of weeks, we're going to do various marketing campaigns to get more people aware of what we're doing to help reach that goal of 800,000. But the other important thing I also want to stress with that is, with the campaign, we're primarily focused on chronic wounds around bed sores, but it's also an important problem looking at diabetic foot ulcers, which are also a bed sore, but it just happens on people with diabetes because they have neuropathy. So, and it's also a visual inspection there as well. So our device has that dual use case for both chronic wounds that include both bed sores and diabetic foot ulcers to help prevent amputations and prevent the loss of functionality of the foot.
Yeah, something I actually wanted to ask earlier in our conversation around, potential other use cases. Is there an opportunity in dermatology at all?
Yeah, actually, there's a big opportunity in dermatology. As I told you before, if you had a sunburn, how would you know? You just
Right.
look at your skin and see. That's basically what dermatologists are doing. And so with our device, think about like psoriasis, acne, rosacea,
Yeah.
even eventually skin cancer. We could see those early signs of skin inflammation that are related to those conditions and track how they're changing over time. So there's a big opportunity in dermatology that we're also looking to explore.
Yeah.
In terms of getting feedback, eventually testing on people who have psoriasis and eczema or rosacea or severe acne. And that is a definite part of our go-to-market road plan for our, let's say, Gen 2 product.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think going back to a comment you were making around the consequences to hospitals from a financial standpoint. And while there might not be reimbursement, I think it's important to remind everyone that you're developing a very low cost technology, that's going to help provide significant outcomes and make a huge impact here, right? So that low cost product can literally save that hospital potentially millions. And really the most important part here is the patient and saving their life, right? But when you look at it from a money standpoint, I know me, I love making small investments throughout my life that save me a lot of money in the long run. And no one's giving me a discount on that investment, but I'm smart enough. And I think that happens a lot throughout our lives. So, I think it's important to kind of highlight that. But what about other future milestones, say here in the next 6 to 18 months?
In the next 6 to 18 months, we'll really head down outside of fundraising. We're focused on technology development, growing our clinical pipeline, and setting up some tests, as well as optimizing some of our algorithms with image processing. And one more important thing, in growing our team. So we need to bring on like 2 or 3 additional team members, an AI software programmer, business development director, technology director, clinical research coordinator, and a operations person. So the next 6 to 18 months are going to be super busy.
Well, you are always super busy, Sanna. I mean, I follow you online, and literally, you every week seem to be winning a new accolade in a new place. And so I can only take my hat off to you and the amazing work that you do. Kyle, we always talk about reflection, and it kind of brings me around to that time where I'm thinking, Sanna, clearly through this journey, you've learned a lot because you're out there making it happen. And so I'm wondering, as if there's any advice, maybe 1 or 2 tips that you would share for somebody else, maybe it's like an academic or maybe an early stage potential founder, on how they might get started or any sort of problems they should be thinking and how to address them.
Okay, that's also a very, very good question. I would say I'm going to separate it out. If you're an academic, the main advice I would give you is start building your network outside of the university. So start going to business pitches, set up your LinkedIn account, and then the second advice I would give is do the entrepreneurial program at your business school. Oftentimes, if you do that, you can come out of that with a free business plan if you already have an idea, with a potential team, and then you start learning about all the competitions where you can start getting money for your idea. So those would be my 2 tips. It's all about community. So start building that community outside of the university, that network, and then get the entrepreneurial training for free at your university while you're already there. Take it as your elective. Don't pay more for it than you have to. Just take it as an elective. If you're not already a business student, if you're an engineer, take it as your, 5th extra credit that you're already paying for, that you get this training for free, and then go into it with an actual idea, even if it's something you're just making up. So you get the experience of thinking through how to put a business plan together for something that you actually care about and are passionate about, which kind of changes sometimes how you think about it, and how you build the story around it. So that would be my 2 pieces of advice for academics. For non-academics, I would say it's all about who you know. That I think that's the hardest lesson I learned coming out as an academic. It's all about who you know. And the medtech community is very, 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 I'm going to say it one more time, very small.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing hardware. It's one of like the smallest groups. And so if you don't know people in that group, because there's so much regulation around it and so much red tape where, when things go bad, they can go really bad. Like think of Theranos, that if people don't already know you, they're like, how are you going to do this? Can we really trust that you know what you're doing? Are you working with the right people? Are you working with anybody that I already know? Like there's a lot of unspoken, like who knows who going on in the background, that if you're not already plugged into that network, don't even bother. Like if you're not working on getting plugged into that network, good luck to you. Because it's a combination of 2 things: a small network where everybody already knows each other, and a highly regulated space where people are like, we need to be able to trust that the person knows what they're doing, and if we don't know you, we don't have that trust yet. And so it's hard.
Honestly, Sam, I love that advice. In terms of the programming, obviously coming from being involved in a program, it's something personally passionate about. But equally on both sides, academic, non-academic, the network is everything. And so whether you're out there just pushing or testing the water or growing and expanding your personal network, there's just benefit all along that journey. So whether you're doing it with a new venture you're not sure about, or whether that becomes a new venture or just personally growing, that network is so key to every part of your growth. And I think to your point, it's a small community, but turning that on the other side, that's beneficial because you can then be part of that small community by getting involved. And so again, I
Yeah.
think it's just great advice, Kyle.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
would agree. And Sana, I would imagine too that, after listening to this discussion and learning more about your company and technology and everything that you're working towards, raising money, building a team, and bringing this exciting product to market. I'm sure people might want to get in touch with you. They might be inspired. They might want to join you on this journey or support you. What's the best way to do so?
The best way I would say is by LinkedIn. And then if not by LinkedIn, then my email, which will be at info@rubitection.com. And we can provide that to you at the end.
Yeah, that's perfect. And we will make sure that everyone obviously has access to getting a hold of you and learning more about your technology. So fantastic.
Well, we have covered a
Thank you.
lot here, Sanna. This has been amazing. So really exciting to have you on and obviously sharing this opportunity on the crowdfunding, because I think it's something that's obviously a pretty new space with the legislation opening up and providing this opportunity for people who maybe haven't, as you said earlier on, had the chance to invest. And again, it's not just about making the difference for the patients, but making a difference from, Kyle, again, you touched on this, the investment side, where you get access to these sorts of opportunities. So if you're listening in, check it out, because this is an exciting opportunity and one worth seriously thinking about. So again, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity and all the great questions. And I really appreciate your support. And my final takeaway for those who want to build their network quickly in the medtech space, the easiest way to do it is to go to medtech conferences and health tech conferences, because all of the players in the space are all in one space. And you can just go around, meet everybody, add them on LinkedIn, give out your business card, explain what you're doing, and all of a sudden you're not in the network yet, but you're now at least associate. And then you can, work your way up to being in the network. But that's the most efficient way as well to get in there. But thank you guys so much for the support. And I appreciate your support with getting us some awareness about the problem, our low-cost solution, and about our WeFunding campaign to help raise the money to take us to the next level. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. Our pleasure. Well, ladies and gentlemen, another huge thank you to Sanna Gaspard from Rubitection, CEO and co-founder. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the MedTech Impact Podcast. I'm Kyle Cruz.
And I'm Richard Meiklejohn. Until next time, keep innovating.